Hey guys, back again with another video. Review on Okami HD for the PS3. And you can also get this game on PS2 and on Wii with like kind of motion controls, which really sound terrible. I don't really want to play that version of the game, and I'm glad I didn't. But this is one of those games that came out back on the PS2. Everyone seemed to love it. It didn't get a whole lot of sales, but it got a lot of critical praise, and it's always been considered like one of the best games of that generation. It's directed by Hideki Kamiya, formerly of Clover Studios when this game was developed, and they were like kind of a studio within Capcom that got shut down actually shortly after this game came out, which is a bit unfortunate, but a lot of the developers there went on to form Platinum, and that's where Kamiya currently is. And this is one of his most interesting games. He's always loved the Legend of Zelda series. A Link to the Past, from what I understand, is one of his favorite games, and out of all the games he's done, this has got to be the one that's most inspired by Zelda. It feels like a Zelda game in a lot of ways. And this HD version looks absolutely amazing, and you can get it for quite cheap. So if you haven't played Okami, I think this is definitely the best way to do it. And I love this game. I thought this game was terrific. In fact, there's very few things about it that I didn't like. From start to finish, like all like 42 hours or so of it, I really enjoyed. I think it's much better than some of the recent Zelda games like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. And it's definitely one of the best games I've played in quite a while. It's really creative. It's filled with personality. It looks and sounds phenomenal, but we'll get to that. We'll talk about that. Obviously with this review. We'll start with story, and this is actually a fairly story-driven game, especially for a Kamiya game. You can tell they put a lot of effort into this. There's a lot of dialogue in this game. There are a lot of cutscenes. There's a lot of character development, a lot of characters you'll meet throughout this world. And the game is influenced by like Japanese folklore, and you play as like the god of the sun, and she's like a dog, and her name is Amaterasu. It's this weird name. But basically, that's who you control, and you get kind of a companion early on named Isun, who's kind of like almost like this fairy type creature, but he's kind of like this artist. He's a little annoying. I'll talk about him maybe a little bit later. But the main plot of the game is trying to rid the land of this curse brought on by this god Orochi. And obviously there's a little more depth than that. I'm not going to go super in depth here because there is actually quite a lot of story. And it can be a bit much at times, I won't lie, especially in the beginning, because the intro is like almost like 2 hours long with constant dialogue, a lot of backstory. There's a lot of lore with this game too. Some of it's interesting, some of it not so much. There are some interesting characters here and there. There's a lot of goofy humor that you'll find throughout the game with some of the characters. Isun, the character who's kind of like your Navi character, is actually kind of annoying. His personality I really don't like. Like, it's just like constantly just talking about hot babes and boobs and shit like this, and it gets old. It gets tiring. I really didn't care for that character all that much. Although he gets maybe a little better by the end. There are some definite emotional moments in this game that hit harder than I was expecting, especially towards the end. But I can't say I was totally invested with the story from start to finish. I think I maybe would have preferred if it was, I don't know, if it just didn't have as much of a story focus as there was, because it gets a bit much at times. But I think the story, for the most part, is fairly well written, and it's engaging most of the time. It's certainly a hell of a lot better than most of the stories in Kamiya's games, especially like compare this to like Bayonetta, and it's actually kind of ridiculous. And I think it's got a more interesting like world and characters and story than a lot of the Zelda games, surprisingly enough. Although, honestly, I don't think the Zelda games are really known for like their amazing stories or anything like that. But yeah, the story's decent. It's nothing mind-blowing or anything like that, but it's surprisingly good for a game of this type, and I guess a game, directed by Hideki Kamiya. But gameplay is where a lot of like the creativity comes in with this game. The structure is very similar to like 3D Zelda games, where you'll have like this world that's kind of separated by like these smaller areas. It's not like a huge open world. But it's fairly dense with things to do and places to see, and there's a lot of like environmental variety. And like I said before, the world is quite interesting. But you're kind of solving people's problems in the overworld, and then eventually you'll be doing like these mini dungeons. Like with Zelda, there's like a dungeon map that you'll find in each dungeon. There'll be like mini bosses, a main boss, an ability that you'll get for your celestial brush. That kind of lets you progress further through the dungeon, and it's almost always going to be used against the boss of that dungeon. So very Zelda, very, it's the classic 3D Zelda structure, and it's a structure that I really enjoy. But this game, there's enough to set it apart so that doesn't feel like a complete clone. The dungeons themselves, compared to a Zelda game, are a lot simpler, I think, in terms of design. There's not as many routes for you to take, but there are still a good amount of puzzles and combat encounters that you'll find, but they're not huge like a lot of Zelda dungeons are. But I think most of them are quite interesting. There's only one that really pissed me off. It was this one where you had to keep following this book throughout all these different pathways, and you had a time limit. And honestly, it was kind of frustrating. There was a lot of frustrating design with that dungeon, but overall, I think there's a good variety within these dungeons. There's even some platforming too that you'll have to do at times. But the main mechanic of this game, what sets it apart, is the Celestial Brush mechanic, and this ties into the combat as well as puzzle solving and exploration. And all the ways they utilize this mechanic are quite genius. It's pretty impressive to see all the ways that this game builds upon this core mechanic, where you'll have ink. Your character kind of has health, and then you also have ink. And when you press R1, I believe, I can't remember what you press, but you can kind of pause the action whether you're in combat or just exploring the world, and then you get kind of a brush, and you use the right analog stick to draw symbols, matching to the different abilities that you'll get. So you might get a slash ability where you can slash through enemies and do extra damage to them, and sometimes you have to slash enemies at certain points. If it's nighttime, you can draw a circle in the sky to make the sun come out. You can draw wind symbols to send the wind gusting in different directions, and there's all sorts of different abilities that I don't really want to spoil, but a lot of them are quite creative. A lot of the puzzles, the environmental puzzles, are really creative with the different abilities that you'll get. And some of the bosses are quite enjoyable. Combat is kind of interesting in this game, where you'll see these enemies roaming the map, and then you run into them, and then you'll get into a kind of a combat arena. And you'll have standard melee attacks. You have different weapons that you can equip. There's bead weapons, glaive weapons, and then reflector weapons. You'll get certain weapons from defeating bosses, and there's different combos you can do. You can go to a dojo to get new moves. So there's a good amount of variety in the combat, but it's not to the level of something like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry. And obviously they didn't intend for the combat to be super complex in this game, but I think the brush adds some interesting elements to it, where to take out a lot of enemies, you're going to have to use certain brush mechanics, and there's quite a lot of different enemy types. You'll find a bunch of them, and you'll have to really kind of make use of your brush abilities in certain ways to take them on. And the game kind of gets progressively harder, but it's a very easy game overall. In fact, I didn't die a single time throughout the game. So that should kind of give you an indication of how kind of simplistic the combat is, but it feels good. It feels satisfying. And I really did enjoy using the Celestial Brush, and the bosses are the highlights, where they're not actually just combat arenas. You'll have to, like with a lot of Zelda games, figure out a pattern, figure out their weaknesses, and they're often very big and take up a lot of the screen, and they have some interesting patterns to them. For the most part, I actually quite enjoyed the bosses, even though if they weren't super challenging. One boss towards the end of the game, Ninetales, I thought was really cool. I don't really want to spoil that boss, but I thought it had a really interesting mechanic. One little thing about the game that I don't like is towards the end they actually make you repeat a lot of the bosses again, and there's one boss in particular that was cool the first time, but by the time I had to fight this boss the third time in the game, I was getting kind of frustrated. I was getting kind of annoyed. But yeah, the combat is good. I enjoyed the combat more than I was expecting to. I'm not sure I would say it's the best part of the game. I think the actual just exploration and puzzle solving, and even actually the platforming is actually kind of tricky at times. I think that's some of the best parts of the game, and just how creative it is. It's so creative, this game, and it's got a lot of personality too, which I'll talk about with the visuals. But other things with gameplay, I mean, you can kind of upgrade your character a little bit. You can kind of get praise by feeding animals and then doing some side quests for people. and then like defeating certain enemies and bosses will get you praise as well. And the more praise you have, you can kind of upgrade your abilities. So how much health you have, how much ink you have, which ink is again something you kind of got to consider. And you can break barrels to get like supplies and things like that. You can also use items during battle, like to deflect enemy attacks or increase your strength or defense for a little bit. So that's pretty cool. I didn't have to use the items all that much though. The game was so easy that I didn't feel the need to use them all that much anyways. You get like a pouch to fill food with. And once the pouch is completely full, you can come back to life if you die. You know, of course, just making the game even easier. You know, I mean, I'm pretty sure this game was not, like, it wasn't intended to be difficult, but I gotta say, I would have maybe preferred it if it was a little more difficult. I mean, this is probably one of the easiest games I've ever played, personally. But yeah, you can collect praise and kind of upgrade your character, which is cool. I always enjoyed doing that. Other things with gameplay, I guess I don't really want to spoil the rest of it. Some of the fun of this game is just seeing what they come up with next. What sort of concepts they come up with, like with the dungeons and the overworld exploration. And a lot of great characters to meet too throughout the game. Visuals, this game looks amazing. Like, it looks incredible. It's one of those games that's gonna keep holding up, especially this HD version. It's got like this cel-shaded look to it. It's very unique. And like the outlines of characters are very big. Like, you've got these big black pen and ink outlines around all the characters. And I think it gives this game its own kind of flair and style. The environments look amazing. I love all the animations. It's one of those games where once you see it in motion, it looks so good. One of those games I think is just going to really hold up visually over the years. And yeah, it really, the style, like the look of the game definitely fits that kind of Japanese folklore thing that they've got going on with the game. The soundtrack is also phenomenal. A lot of like Asian sounding instruments with the music, and then a lot of like really slow, peaceful, melodic music. There are some more intense themes in here as well, but it's all really like soothing. It's kind of like really soothing, relaxing music. And a lot of it is quite beautiful to listen to, and again, it matches like the visuals of the game so well. But yeah, the soundtrack's fantastic. There's no voice acting. A lot of it is just like these really annoying voice quips. So that's a bit disappointing, but I can understand why they went with that direction. Isun in particular, I think, has a really annoying voice. And another thing too, like, I think dialogue moves way too slowly in this game. You keep having to mash A to get through the dialogue, and it just keeps coming up really slowly, so that can kind of be a bit of a nuisance. But yeah, audio-visual presentation is outstanding in this game. So yeah, definitely one of the highlights of the game. But yeah, I mean, that's about it. There's probably stuff I'm missing, but if you haven't played Okami, I would highly recommend it. I thought it was enjoyable. From start to finish, I really had a good time with this game, and it's one of the most unique games you'll play. There's nothing quite like it. I mean, the only game I can think of are like the Zelda games, because it's very similar in structure, but it does enough different, especially with that celestial brush mechanic, that I think it doesn't feel like this pale imitation of that series. But yeah, that's it, guys. Have you played this game? What do you think of it? The Wii version, for the combat in the Wii version, you have to like waggle the Wiimote to attack, and to do the dodge, you have to waggle the nunchuck, and that sounds horrendous. I could never play the game like that. If you're gonna try to play this game, don't go for the Wii version. Try to play it on PS2, and especially on PS3, this HD version. I think this is definitely the definitive way to play this game. You can only get it digitally, but I think you can get like a physical copy in Japan for this game. There might even be one in Europe, I'm not sure exactly, but I think this game is totally worth playing. I'm glad I finally played it after all these years. Sad I missed out on it back on the PS2, but yeah, that's Okami. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.